At first, everything looked loud and confident. As tensions rose between India and Pakistan, India sent a clear message to the region by deploying its newest aircraft carrier, INS Vikrant, into the Arabian Sea. This wasn't a routine move. Aircraft carriers are the biggest, most expensive symbols of military power a country can put to sea. When one sails out, it's meant to be seen. Indian media framed the deployment exactly that way, as deterrence, dominance, and a warning shot. The message was simple: India is in control. But then something interesting happened. Pakistan didn't respond with speeches or press releases. Instead, it responded with actions. Missile tests were announced. Airspace exercise zones were declared. Fighter jets, including J-10C and JF-17 aircraft, began patrolling. In military terms, Pakistan was saying, "We're ready too." And then, silence. The Indian aircraft carrier that had just dominated headlines seemed to fade away. No more bold statements, no dramatic images, no follow-up displays of power. The spotlight moved on, but the carrier hadn't done what carriers are supposed to do: stay visible and intimidating. That silence raises a serious question. Was this just routine de-escalation? Or did India quietly step back because the situation was more dangerous than it looked? This is where the mystery begins. To understand why that silence mattered, we need to zoom out and look at what aircraft carriers really represent. India operates 2 aircraft carriers, and when you add everything together, construction, aircraft, weapons, training, maintenance, and decades of operation, the total cost likely exceeds $10 billion. That's not a small defense program. That's the kind of money that could fund hundreds of fighter jets, air defenses, submarines, or missile forces. For a developing country, this level of investment isn't just about security. It's about status. Aircraft carriers are often called floating capitals. They are designed to do 3 big things. First, Project Air Power far from home. A carrier lets a country strike targets without using foreign bases. Second, control sea lanes, the trade routes that keep an economy alive. Third, intimidate rivals simply by showing up. The presence alone is supposed to change behavior. That's why countries love carriers. They don't just fight wars, they send messages. But here's where the tension comes in. If India's carriers actually work as intended, then this investment makes sense. They give India leverage, deterrence, and flexibility. But if they can't survive near a hostile coast, or can't dominate the airspace around them, then those billions weren't spent on power. They were spent on prestige. Think of it like buying a luxury armored car. It looks unstoppable. It turns heads and it sends a signal. But if it can't handle real combat conditions, then in a crisis, it becomes a liability instead of an advantage. That's the uncomfortable contradiction at the heart of this issue. Even if India's carriers aren't perfect, surely something this expensive must be combat capable, right? To answer that, we have to look backward, because part of India's confidence comes from past successes that may no longer apply. To understand why India believed its aircraft carriers would still be effective, we have to look at history. In earlier India-Pakistan conflicts, India did use aircraft carriers with some success. These weren't modern supercarriers. They were aging, second-hand British ships. But at the time, they didn't face serious resistance. Back then, Pakistan's situation was very different. Pakistan's navy was small and lacked reach. Its air force was limited, with fewer aircraft and outdated technology. There was no real ability to challenge carrier-based aircraft at sea. In simple terms, India's carriers were operating in an environment where the opponent couldn't really fight back. It was like bringing a heavyweight boxer into a ring with no gloves on the other side. The result looked impressive, but the conditions were extremely favorable. This created a powerful lesson in India's military thinking aircraft carriers work. But here's the problem. Militaries often fall into what analysts call a historical trap, assuming that what worked once will keep working forever. Technology changes, enemies adapt, battlefields evolve. India's mistake may be that it is still thinking in terms of past wars, while preparing for a very different future. The tools that worked when Pakistan was weak may not work against a Pakistan that has spent decades modernizing its air force, navy, and missile systems. Or, to put it simply, what worked against a weak Pakistan decades ago may be dangerous, even suicidal, against today's Pakistan. That realization brings us to the turning point of the story. Because modern Pakistan is not the same opponent India faced in the past. This is where the story changes completely. Modern Pakistan is no longer a passive player at sea or in the air. Over the past 2 decades, Pakistan has focused on building what military planners call an anti-access environment. These are systems designed not to dominate the ocean, but rather to deny powerful enemies the freedom to operate near its coast. So, let's start with the air. Pakistan now operates F-16s, J-10C, and JF-17 fighters. And these are not just showpieces. They're integrated into a network that includes modern sensors, airborne early warning aircraft, and long-range air-to-air missiles like the PL-15. These missiles can engage targets far beyond visual range, which really matters because carrier aircraft rely on taking off, climbing, and forming groups. Those are moments of vulnerability. Then there's the sea. Pakistan has invested heavily in submarines, especially modern Chinese-built designs optimized for anti-surface warfare. Submarines are, honestly, one of the biggest threats to aircraft carriers. They're hard to detect, difficult to track, and, well, a single successful strike can cripple even the largest ship. On top of that, Pakistan operates Type 054 AP frigates, equipped with modern radar systems and advanced anti-ship missiles. These ships don't need to hunt carriers alone. They work as part of a wider kill zone. Now add the biggest advantage of all, geography. Pakistan would be fighting close to home. That means, short response times, fighters launching from nearby air bases, and shore-based anti-ship missiles backing up naval forces. An aircraft carrier, by contrast, would be operating at the edge of hostile territory, far from safe ports, with limited room to maneuver. This leads to a critical insight that many people miss. Aircraft carriers are most vulnerable near hostile coastlines, exactly where India would need to use them against Pakistan. In open oceans, carriers can hide in vast space. Near a defended coastline, they become predictable, trackable, and targetable. And that's why the tension in this situation is so high, because once you understand Pakistan's modern capabilities, the question is no longer, can India threaten Pakistan with carriers? It becomes, can India risk losing one? India's carrier force rests on 2 ships, INS Vikramaditya and INS Vikrant. On paper, that sounds impressive. In practice, both ships come with serious limitations. Start with INS Vikramaditya. This ship was never designed to be an aircraft carrier from the beginning. It was originally a Soviet-era cruiser, later converted by Russia into a carrier. That matters, because conversions inherit old design compromises, layout, power systems, and structural limits that can't be fully fixed. Over its service life, Vikramaditya has suffered repeated reliability problems. Boiler failures, fires, and extended maintenance periods have kept it out of action for long stretches. In simple terms, it's like rebuilding a decades-old truck into a sports car. It may run, but it will always struggle under stress. Then there's INS Vikrant, India's first domestically built carrier. Vikrant is a national achievement, but ambition doesn't automatically equal maturity. The ship went through multiple launch ceremonies, long delays, and during sea trials showed noticeable pitching, raising questions about propulsion power and overall design balance. These aren't cosmetic issues. They directly affect flight operations, especially in rough seas. Now look at the air wing, the heart of any carrier. Together, both carriers can deploy just over 30 aircraft. That's a small number by modern standards. And those aircraft are MiG-29K fighters, which face several problems. Their radars and missiles lag behind newer regional fighters. They have high maintenance demands. Operational readiness rates have often been reported as low. Carrier aircraft must be exceptionally reliable. If even a few jets are grounded due to spare part shortages or maintenance issues, the carrier's combat power drops sharply. This leads to the core reality many people overlook. A carrier is not powerful because it's big. It's powerful because of the aircraft it can keep flying every day under combat conditions. And this is where India's carriers face their biggest weakness. Against modern fighters, submarines, and missile systems, a small, maintenance-heavy air wing becomes a serious liability. By now, it should be clear that this issue isn't just about ships or fighter jets. It's about whether a military system can keep fighting once the first shots are fired. Modern wars are not won in the first week. They are won by logistics, repair, and replacement. Here's where India faces a serious structural problem. India's military inventory is a patchwork. It uses equipment from Russia, France, Israel, the United States, and domestic programs. Each of these systems comes with different spare parts, different maintenance tools, different software, and different supply chains. In peacetime, this is inefficient. In wartime, it can be disastrous. Imagine running a car fleet where every vehicle is from a different manufacturer and none of the parts are interchangeable. If one breaks down, you can't just swap parts, you wait. In war, waiting means losing. This problem hits aircraft carriers especially hard. Carrier operations demand constant spare parts, high aircraft availability, and rapid repair after damage or wear. If a MiG-29K goes down due to a mechanical issue, replacing or repairing it isn't simple. Parts may come from abroad, production runs may be small, and political conditions can slow or stop deliveries altogether. Now contrast this with Pakistan. Pakistan has increasingly standardized its forces, especially through Chinese platforms. That means shared logistics, compatible systems, faster repair cycles, and backing from a massive industrial base capable of scaling production. In a prolonged conflict, this difference matters more than headlines or press conferences. Here's the strategic nightmare for India. If a war drags on, India could lose aircraft, ships, or key components faster than it can replace them. Pakistan, by contrast, could potentially recover losses more quickly. And this connects directly back to aircraft carriers. A damaged carrier aircraft isn't just one less jet. It reduces the carrier's entire defensive bubble. Lose enough aircraft, and the carrier stops being a threat and starts becoming a target. So by this point, the picture is clearer. India isn't just risking ships. It's risking systems it may not be able to sustain under real combat pressure. When you put all the pieces together, the silence around India's aircraft carrier starts to make sense. India doesn't face just one problem. It faces two fronts at the same time. To the west is Pakistan, close, heavily defended, and prepared specifically to deny access near its coastline. To the north is China, a far larger power that India cannot afford to ignore, even during a crisis elsewhere. This matters because aircraft carriers are not expendable assets. Losing a carrier wouldn't just be a military setback. It would be a national shock, a political disaster, and a symbolic collapse of deterrence. No government wants to explain how a ship costing billions and carrying thousands of sailors was damaged or sunk. That kind of loss changes domestic politics overnight. Now consider external support. In theory, India has partners. In practice, distance matters. Countries far away can offer statements, warnings, and diplomatic pressure. But when missiles fly, they rarely rush in to fight someone else's war. On the other hand, Pakistan occupies a far more central position in regional strategy for its key partners. Geography, logistics, and long-term interests all matter here. This imbalance creates a harsh reality. India must calculate every move very carefully because escalation carries asymmetric risks. That's why the most telling signal wasn't a press release or a speech. It was restraint. If India's aircraft carriers were truly dominant, they would have stayed visible. They would have continued to signal strength. They would have remained part of the narrative. Instead, the moment conditions became genuinely dangerous, the message softened. And that leads to the final insight. Peace isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the clearest sign that leaders understand the limits of their power. Modern warfare doesn't reward symbolism. It punishes it. What matters is survivability, sustainability, and real combat effectiveness, not how impressive something looks in a parade or a headline. So the real answer to the carrier question may not come from speeches or official statements. It will come from behavior. And in this case, behavior spoke loudly through silence. As this situation continues to evolve, don't just watch what governments say, watch what they do. Question media narratives, separate prestige from capability. If you want more breakdowns that cut through military myths and focus on real-world power, consider subscribing, and because in modern conflict, reality matters more than flags.